It's a great pleasure for me to welcome back my two very good friends, Bill and Kevin, who have a book they want to talk about. I wanted to start by saying that I've known the governor for more than a decade. His background, of course, was as a political leader, Secretary of Energy, governor, and a negotiator of interesting things. When we initially thought about going to North Korea, who better to go with than Governor Richardson? And the best part of the story, from my perspective, is we're sitting in Beijing and we can't take our mobile phones in. And so we have to give our mobile devices, all of them, to the Google or Chinese people. So my daughter and I, Bill and Kevin, a few others, we give them all to the Chinese Googler. And then my daughter says, "Are your fingers twitching yet, Dad?" And for a few hours, it was just really weird. And then we discovered that we actually liked each other.
Right, we had conversations.
And we actually spent 4 days together getting to know each other by ourselves, and we had the most wonderful time. Governor, it's a pleasure to have you here with Kevin to promote your book. So welcome to Google.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I think with this audience, maybe what we should do is I'll ask a few questions, and we have some Dory questions and maybe some questions here from the audience. But I think there's actually a pretty interesting question sort of right now, which has to do with the bizarre activities of the last 2 weeks of the U.S. government. Is that a fair characterization? It's just bizarre, just bizarre. And I think we don't get it. And perhaps we don't get it because we're too rational. And this requires sort of an irrational planning, thinking, negotiating mind. You faced these before. Go ahead.
Well, first, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Google. Congratulations, 10% increase in your stock today. And if you get a chance to read the book, I'm giving enormous credit to this guy, Kevin Bleier, the Daily Show guy. What we try to do...
We should say that Kevin is actually a professional comedy writer who moonlights with the two of us to help us
as an amateur diplomat.
Good. Yeah. And Kevin, you've worked for...
you name it. 6 years for Bill Maher, 3 years for Dennis Miller, and then for the last 8 years I was a writer.
You liberal.
I am a comedic mercenary or a rabid schizophrenic. I'm not quite sure. Back and forth.
No, but what we try to do in this book, and President Clinton used to say, bad people like Richardson, send them to talk to him.
By the way, you don't treat President Clinton very well in this book.
Well, I'll get to that. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that we're trying to make this book not just, okay, I negotiated with these bad guys, Saddam Hussein, North Korea, Cuba, Sudan, but how do you apply this to your daily life? You know, when you're negotiating with your spouse, your wife, your kid.
Yeah.
You know what?
Kevin, are you
treat them all like
analogy there, or
yes.
What was your comedic objective?
After all, it's the best thing to treat your spouse like an armchair
it's
dictator.
To find ways to get things done with difficult people. But on the shutdown, on the shutdown, I wrote a little piece in the Washington Post last week. Obviously, nobody's listening to me. But I suggested 4 things that they should do differently. And this is our Congress. These are our leaders. I was a congressman 15 years. So I know the intense pressure, the media glare. You got to, suck up to your caucuses when you're a leader. I'm tough. We're going to be tough on our side. I would have done 4 things differently. 1, they needed mediation. It's reached a point where it was so personal. They hate each other so much. They're talking to the cameras instead of to each other. They're talking to their caucuses to show how they're strong leaders and they want to get reelected as speakers, et cetera. So I would have had somebody like Henry Paulson, Tim Geithner, ex-secretaries of the Treasury that are respected, that know budgets, that maybe can go in and cool things down. Number 2, I would have had the president or somebody take them away from the Hill, go to the White House, lock up the locale, and say, you're not coming out until you come up with a deal. Because what happens when you're in intense pressure, you're showing off to the press, to your own constituencies. Set a date certain for the end of the negotiation. I would have had everybody at the White House. Let them stay at the Lincoln bedroom and see if they. That's supposed to be funny.
Pack them all in.
And then thirdly, I think there was always, Eric, outlines of a deal. But what happened was the very intense Tea Party people. What I would have done if I'd been Boehner, the speaker, I would have tested the Tea Party guys on a vote. You know, machos, 40 votes, we want to shut down the government. I bet you there would have been some peeling off until you put somebody to a vote. Go on record, because you'll be attacked pro and con when you take a vote. So I would have done that differently. The last thing that I would do, the outlines of a deal were obvious. Okay, president's going to not do anything about Obamacare. You know, that's passed as law of the land. The default, the debt limit, take that off the table. That should have been done early. A shutdown negotiation, but say, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about what the country needs. The country needs economic growth. The country needs immigration reform. The country needs entitlement reform. The country needs tax reform, regulatory reform, technology initiatives. So I would have framed the negotiation differently, but now I think it's crucial that the president step in and say, okay, this is a bad episode, but we're going to move on and pursue an agenda, not just that's related to the budget shutdown. That's what I would have done.
It's interesting that in your book, you have a lot of sort of subtle points about negotiating, and I actually learned a number by just reading it. And you tell an interesting story about you had been aligned with Mrs. Clinton, and then you switched allegiance to Mr. Obama. And you tell a story about both the wrath of the Clintons, I'll use your word, but you also tell something about a mistake you made in that. Can you take us through that?
Yeah.
It's rare for a political leader to admit a mistake, and I think this one is an interesting one because you may have been right, but you may have handled it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, in the book, I point out the successes we had, the good techniques, but also the mistakes. This one and one I made in Cuba when I got really ticked off at the Cubans and denounced them for not turning over a prisoner, which was a terrible mistake. With the Clintons, this is the scene. I'd been a presidential candidate, which I didn't last too long, okay, but no jokes. I lasted three primaries, but still, the only Hispanic in the race, Richardson, excellent Hispanic name. Nobody knew, period, about me. And so people wanted my endorsement. You know, Obama would call, Hillary would call, John Edwards would call. Biden was already at. I always tell Biden, I got more votes than you do. Iowa, New Hampshire. He doesn't like that. But so what happened was I was being solicited. And Bill Clinton, I'd been very close to him. I'd been his UN ambassador, Secretary of Energy. We'd been pals together. You know, I defended him on the Lewinsky stuff. We'd watch TV together. And he says, I want to talk to you. I want you to endorse Hillary. I want to come to Santa Fe to the governor's mansion. But let's just chill out. We'll watch the Super Bowl. And I said, okay. But instead of saying no, which I should have, because it raised enormous expectations, his visit. You know, the great negotiator himself, former president, my friend, coming to Santa Fe to ask for my endorsement. And there was such a media glare. And then when I didn't endorse, it was a mistake. I shouldn't have, well, when I didn't endorse Hillary, it was a mistake to have him come to Santa Fe with that glare. And I say that in the book. I raised expectations. I made them look bad.
But what's interesting in your framing of this is that the individuals you're working with are surrounded by other actors that put pressure on them. In your case, a lot of it is the media. And once somebody gets committed in the media, it gets much, much harder for them to do anything rational with you.
Yeah. And at the time, I really was soul searching. I saw Obama. I thought he was something special, something new, inspirational. I loved his speeches, the people he was attracting. I knew the Clintons, and I served well with the Clintons, but I did say, oh, geez, all the same Clinton people are coming back. Let's try something new with Obama. That was supposed to be funny.
It was, trust me. But if I may, speaking of the media, there was a particular moment, a media moment during the debates that Obama gave you the impression or gave you the sense that you could trust him.
You know, these debates, you all watch them, but when you're a candidate that's not up in the polls, they ask you very few questions. So the media is having a field day with Obama and Clinton. I always used to sit next to Obama in the debates. They always put the minorities on the side. And there was a time in one of the debates where I'm like chatting with Obama. We're saying, you know, just a little gossip. And no one's asking me questions. But all of a sudden, I think it was Wolf Blitzer, says, Governor Richardson, what's your position on this issue? And there's a slight problem because I wasn't listening. I was talking to Obama. So here's my big chance, and I'm going to blow it, right? So Obama leans over and he says, they asked you about Katrina. Katrina. My position on Katrina is... He could have thrown me under the bus, but little incidents like that, I liked the guy, you know, very gentle.
And he told the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. That rare moment.
And so
that's
little
a flub in
things
politics.
like that. And so I endorsed him. And
Not right then, but later.
I almost
Later.
did then, but
Yeah. When you're in a debate, probably the best tactic is not to say, he's got my vote. We're still in the debates.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the crazy people you've dealt with, and then we'll return to North Korea, a large set of crazy people, I think. Let's talk a little bit about Cuba.
yeah.
Did you have a special role in Cuba because of your Hispanic connections? Why did you end up in Cuba doing all these things? What did you in fact do, and what were the Castro people actually like?
Well, President Clinton at the time, I was a congressman at the time, but I'd done a lot of these unofficial missions that had gotten results, mainly ceasefire, getting political prisoners out. And I knew Castro, I'd made visits, this is Fidel, and I had succeeded in getting political prisoners, 3 political prisoners out, an immigration agreement allowing more Cubans to come into the United States paying less. At one point, I remember Jesse Jackson also did a lot of this, Jimmy Carter going in and trying to bring people back. And I remember succeeding once with Fidel Castro. We spoke Spanish to each other. We talked baseball. That was a big plus. I mean, he's a very interesting, fascinating guy. He doesn't sleep at night. He sleeps during the day. He's up all night. He's a night owl, but he reads everything. He's probably the most intelligent leader I met in terms of intellect, not necessarily his values and his policies. But I remember pleading, give me some of these Cuban political prisoners. You know, you're not getting any help in the press by keeping them here. And I remember he'd say, no, I'm not going to do it. No lo voy a hacer, Richardson. No. You know, Cubans, Latins call each other by their last name. They don't say Mr. Governor or anything. No, Richardson, no lo vamos a hacer. And I said, please, please. You gave Jesse Jackson, the black guy, 25. I'm asking, is your Hispanic brother, give me 4.
The word is cuatro.
And he, you know, he looked at me and he started laughing. He said, all right, vamos. Vete. So that was the real, but then after he left power, this is the one area where I made a terrible mistake, Eric. This was about 3 years ago. I was no longer governor. I forgot that. When you have power, you have a little more juice when you're negotiating. But I just had my foundation. I went to Cuba. There's this guy named Alan Gross. He's a contractor, an American who got stuck in Cuba 4 years ago because he was selling telephone. He had telephone.
Trying to wire up some communities to the internet.
And they accused him of being a spy. He was in jail. And it was a single issue that divided the U.S. and Cuba more than anything. By the way, I think our policy towards Cuba doesn't make sense. The embargo, it makes no sense. I mean, let American technology come in, democracy will come right after. But what happened there was I thought I had some agreement with the Cubans to get Alan Gross out. You know, we'd take him off the terrorism list. We would find ways to have better ties environmentally, drugs. And so I had this very contentious meeting with the foreign minister of Cuba. I thought we were going to make a deal, but he basically said, Bill, you're not going to get Alan Gross. I'm not only not going to let you take him away, I'm not going to let you see him. And third, I want you to leave Cuba right away. And I said, geez, this is a very hospitable meeting, Bruno. Not very funny. And so instead of like shutting up and leaving, going to my hotel, cooling down, there were all these cameras there. And I was angry. And I went and I said, Alan Gross is a hostage. He should be allowed to leave. The Cuban government is being unreasonable. And furthermore, unless I go visit him in his hospital, I'm not going to leave Cuba. 4 days later, I left because it was obvious I wasn't going to see him. Big mistake when you're negotiating. Don't lose your cool. I mean, this seems common. Don't lose your cool. Don't go to the press. Don't get ticked off needlessly.
So my rule for negotiation, which is going to be expanded based on your ability, is called PIA, which stands, by the way, for pain in the ass. So patience, right? Information, and have some alternatives, right? Now, you in your book actually lay out a deeper foundation, and let me just summarize it. You need to set the mood, right? It has to be, you have to control it. Minutes matter. You need to say yes, right, to keep it moving along. Humor, right? I guess we should always travel with Kevin, right?
You're supposed to lower the expectations.
Don't ask for a yes, assume a yes, right? Sometimes the soft sell works. I think these examples that you're describing don't, and salespeople know this, if the customer is thinking, keep your own mouth shut, because when the customer is talking, you're winning, even if it doesn't appear to be true. So can you kind of codify that for us? I mean, we have Google is involved in lots and lots of negotiations in lots of different kinds of ways.
Well, those are principles. I think others that I would add is let the other side save face. Don't try to take all the credit. In other words, share the credit in a successful negotiation. Let the other side talk. But also what's very important is try to establish a personal connection. You know, if in diplomacy, we're the United States, a powerful country militarily, I always cede the turf. This is why I end up in North Korea or Cuba or Sudan. I go there, and I don't think it's a big concession. So if it's a territorial issue with your negotiator, they want you to come visit them at their headquarters, do it. It's an easy concession. Humor, I think, is very important. The good news about negotiating with a dictator, a bad person, is dictators can make the decision that give you what you want without having to go through Congress or the press. So you need one shot. And what I've tried to do is, establish these rapports. Like with Saddam Hussein, I was trying to get 2 Americans out. And we started the negotiation. He tried to intimidate me.
By the way, describe what he was like.
I mean, he's a big guy, immaculate uniform. He had about 3 knives and pistols, and he had the Revolutionary Guard around us. So I was slightly intimidated. And, he had these beady eyes, and he'd look at me, and then he'd vent and say, U.S. policy is wrong, and you're a bad country, and, what am I getting out of these negotiations? I give you these 2 Americans. He was like really ticked off. Then I made a terrible mistake, another one. I showed him the sole of my shoe, which to an Arab, like this, Eric, is a supreme insult, like if you're facing each other.
Thank you for letting me know.
And
you've just been insulted. Yes.
He left the meeting. He stormed out.
Really?
Yeah.
And I had this translator. I said, what, is he coming back? What's going on? Am I toast? He said, no, you made a mistake. You insulted the president. He's coming back and you must apologize. He came back. I didn't apologize. I said, I think he may be trying to intimidate me. I think this is a mind game. I'll be respectful, but I won't apologize. So I went back and forth. We went back and forth with each other. I'm making the case for the American. And then all of a sudden, ramrod straight, he says, by virtue of the Section 131 of the Iraqi Constitution, I am going to turn over the 2 Americans to you. And my first instinct was, hey, thanks. Swooping in with the Iraqi Revolutionary Guard, thinking I was going to do something onerous or kill him. We finished the negotiation. We got up. He said, I'm going to call in the press. And, Congressman, this is through a translator, my appearing with you in the Iraqi press does not help my political standing. And I said, well, Mr. President, my standing with you doesn't help mine either. We finished, we were heading out, and he said, by the way, he says, I noticed that you asked, you're a Roman Catholic, you asked that you go to a Catholic service. And Tariq Aziz, my foreign minister wife, is a Chaldean Catholic, so you should go. Another lesson you learn in dealing in a negotiation with dictators, when you got what you want, and he had already announced that I was getting the 2 Americans, get out. Because they change their mind, they're temperamental, they're crazy. You don't want them to add something new. Some press statement screws everything up. So I wanted to leave right after I had the 2 Americans who I was going to pick up at the Swiss embassy. And he said, no, you said you wanted to go to church. I've arranged for you to go to church. He says, but if you really are in a hurry, because I'd made some excuse. I was a congressman. I got votes coming up, which was not true. It was a recess.
He would have known that if he had Googled it.
Yeah.
He didn't at the time.
So he said,
I get that all of the time.
so he says, the only advice I have is when you go to the service, don't go to confession, because if you go to confession, you're going to be late.
He'll be there for a while.
In other words, geez, they don't have a sense of humor. These guys. But he was basically saying, whatever the message, we established like a little connection. He smiled. This is the most evil man in the world. But I left, and I got what I wanted. I mean, the relationship, as you know, was turbulent. Later, I was UN ambassador, probably involved in, the military operation with him. So
Right.
That's what happens. Use humor. Use a personal connection.
What's interesting is that there's another group of people who take the entire opposite view of everything that you tried to do.
Mm-hmm.
Stonewall, firewall, don't engage, they're criminals, they're assholes, shoot them, and so forth and so on. You've heard all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when the State Department tells you to recite that in front of them, you usually decline.
Yeah, I mean, the State Department would give me talking points when I'm talking to a bad guy, because they want U.S. policy reflected.
So, dear Mr. Bad Guy,
Yeah.
you are
You are a bad guy.
You are a bad guy.
Yeah, how we doing so far? Yeah.
And I'm trying to
And
get
instead-
something from the bad guy. That's not a good start, so I don't use that.
So the exact 180 degree from that is how you approached Omar Suleiman in Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, their humor, and sometimes macabre humor, and this one worked because we were trying to get this Israeli named Shalit. You all remember we were involved in that. I was governor, but I had some people try to get this Israeli pilot. He was Israeli military guy out. And Omar Suleiman was the head of security in Egypt. The most notorious human rights violator, put people in prison, and I knew that, and I opened up the meeting. I only talked to him on the phone. And I'll tell you a quick lesson on that. But I started the conversation by saying, Vice President Suleiman, it's good to be here. Now, where are we? He says, well, this is my headquarters, et cetera. I said, well, now where are the dungeons? Where do you take the people's fingernails off? Is it nearby here?
You said this?
I said that, yeah. And he looked at me. And all his, so it broke the ice a little bit. It did.
It's fair to say that could have gone either way. But it worked out. Stavropol
But
sent Governor Richardson in defeat.
the other conversation I'd had with him, we wanted to engage in the negotiations on Shalit, but we had to get Suleiman's approval. And I remember talking on the phone with him before I'd met him, and he said yes in the conversation, but then he started talking again, and I hung up. Now, Did you guys see Moneyball, the movie? All right. Remember when Brad Pitt is negotiating and trading for new ball players, and Jonah Hill, his assistant, says, hey, you know, the general manager still was on the phone. You cut him off. And Brad Pitt said, when you get the answer you want, hang up.
Okay. Let's spend a few minutes talking about North Korea, and then we'll go to everybody's questions. I'm extraordinarily thankful to the governor for one of the great trips of my lifetime with my daughter to North Korea. And this started when we met in New York. Jared Cohen, and who, of course, accompanied us, had set this up along with a couple of our other friends. And I couldn't quite figure out what the governor was up to. But we became good friends when the State Department found out we were going and told us we couldn't go. So I called up the governor, and he said, oh, they say that all the time. Is that roughly correct?
Yes, but not to me. Right.
No, it's true. The State Department, and we have a good diplomatic corps, and I'm not criticizing them, but they're very cautious. They don't want anyone else messing in our foreign policy. Anybody else except, the quote, the professionals. And I happen to think that with North Korea, we need a new policy. We need to have a dialogue, not necessarily a negotiation, but a dialogue that leads to negotiation. Isolating him, punish him, that's not the way I personally think you deal with other countries that have nuclear weapons, that have missiles that are unfriendly. And so they said, well, Eric and governors and Kevin Stripp are not timely. The State Department said that. But, you know, I felt that we made a difference in that trip.
So the week right before we leave, I got a phone call from Dennis McDonough, who's now the chief of staff, who says, we don't want you to go. And I said, why? He said, the timing's wrong. And I said, well, why? Well, what's going to happen is there's going to be an escalation. We're going to retaliate. You know, they're going to do this. We're going to retaliate. They're going to do something else. We're going to retaliate. And I said, well, we're going to be back on Wednesday. Could you retaliate after Wednesday? And he laughed. And it was pretty clear in talking to Jared and to the governor that we would be okay. So we showed up, and for those of you who haven't seen it, my daughter wrote a blog which has been read by many, many people now, which is sort of a 26-year-old summary of what it's like to show up in the world's last repressive state. What I remember the most about North Korea, aside from the bizarreness of it, is the temperature. And the governor in the book talks a lot about the fact that we were heavily photographed with exactly, you never changed your scarf.
Right.
And it was so cold we had to wear all of our outfits inside. And I did not understand how disabling extreme cold is. And this is a country with no energy. And I developed a tremendous sense of sadness for Kenneth Bae, who's the gentleman. One of the goals we had was to try to get him out of the gulag, because I'm sure he was literally sitting there shivering. And shivering is shivering to death. That's how disabling this was.
Yeah.
And I also remember the governor, because he would always sort of lay out the framework, and I would sort of assess, is repetition, 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 trying and trying and trying. Take us through what you were trying to do with us as leading our team.
Well, on that trip, I was trying to do three things. One was Kenneth Bae, the American, detained unfairly, Korean American in a gulag. And, you know, we tried to do that, get him out, or at least get a medical treatment. His trial hadn't started, so we were pushing for his trial. Mm-hmm. And after his trial, usually negotiations can move forward. The second was saying to the North Koreans, the new leader had come in, Kim Jong-un, 30 years old. Nobody knew anything about him. But they'd increase the escalation. They'd increase missile launches. They detonated a nuclear weapon underground. And I was saying to them, what are you doing? You're driving everybody away. You want food, fuel, sanctions off? This is not the way to do it. Why are you doing this? I know you. Take my advice. Just cool down. Needless to say, the uncertainty of the leadership there. And we tried to see, Eric and I and Kevin, the dear leader. He wouldn't see us, but later he saw Dennis Rodman, which ticked me off. But, and then the last objective, and I think Eric is being very, very self-effacing, and this is the Google message, which I say everywhere. The technology, the American technology. We went into this university, and Eric will tell a little bit about that.
Kim Il Sung University, the
Kim Il
e-library.
Sung University. They had all these people on their computers, but there were software engineers, professionals there, professors there. Eric came in, with his Google stuff, and he was the star. They were fascinated. The political leadership, and Eric was spreading the importance of the internet. How, if you've read his book, that's the essence of his book, The Digital Age. But I really felt if they were exposed, the North Korean leadership, to just expanding the internet, to not just the elite that have it, very small group, but to universities, to software engineers, this would be good not just for the people in North Korea, but it might lead to an Arab Spring there, an opening that doesn't exist. But, I was just another politician. They all went over to talk to him, and I was
the rock star.
Stuck with Eric here with Kevin in the corner. But give him your impression.
Yeah.
Well, again, I agree with all that, and you go through this in the book some. Let's talk a little bit about North Korea today. So after our visit, they did actually open up a few things. They allowed, for example, 3G roaming on their million or so phones that are in fact used. There's a partnership with a company called Orascom, which is an Egyptian company which actually provides this, and they actually opened up. Shortly thereafter, they turned it back off. They decided to do this further escalation of conflict with South Korea. They closed for some bizarre reason, they closed the factories that are on the border that provide foreign currency for the northern country.
Industrial.
So they spent 3 months screaming at each other. The new South Korean prime minister, who's a new leader, says she's going to retaliate. Everything gets worse. And now in the last few weeks, it's gotten better. I'm going to be in South Korea in a couple of weeks where I'm going to meet with these people again and try to figure out the South Korean view of all of this. So I can't tell whether North Korea is better or worse, more liberal, more conservative, or just crazier.
My assessment, Eric, is I don't know the answer. And I've been there probably as many times as any American. The uncertainty is because of this new leader who has assumed power. He's consolidated his military power. His name is Kim Jong-un. He's 30 years old. He was educated in Switzerland. His father had the choice of 3 of his sons leading, and they picked the youngest because the other 2, had problems, were playboys, etc. But this guy, nobody knows what makes him tick. What I suspect is happening is he is being manipulated right now by, unfortunately, the harder line members of the Korean People's Army, the military, which is enormously powerful, with the people in the party, in the Communist Party in North Korea, that are anti-engagement, anti-US. My hope is that this is just a phase where, with all this bluster that he throws, all these missile launches, he's establishing and consolidating his own power within the country. Not that he's going to have a difficulty in an election, because it's a cult of personality. My only point there, Eric, is I think whatever you can do to get the South Koreans to engage more with the North Koreans when it comes to family reunification. The Kaesong facility is a high-tech facility that employs about 50,000 North Koreans, I don't know how many thousand South Koreans. Keep that going. Any kind of economic engagement, family reunification. And then maybe there's a big unknown element. The Chinese have influence over North Korea. And I think they're starting to get ticked off with all the bellicosity of the North Koreans. And if they put real pressure on North Korea, because they provide food and fuel, I think you may see them more moderate.
One of the things that we learned was that North Korea is completely dependent on China for water, power, and energy. So if China were to decide that they didn't like what the dear leader is doing, they could stop it in a second.
There are a few famous stories of Chinese giving aid to North Korea. True or not, we're not sure, but they would often send this aid via trains. and the North Koreans would say, thanks for the aid and thanks for the trains. They would keep them as well, and the engineers would have to find a way to get back, sometimes walking across the border. It's true.
Let's go to a few Dory questions, and maybe we can get a couple of people here in the audience as well. There's a series of questions that have been previously submitted, Governor, and I'll just read them, and then maybe you can answer them. And they're all sort of in a similar vein. How do you negotiate when one party is not interested in any compromise? In the charisma myth, Olivia Fox explains that professional negotiators could accurately predict the outcome of negotiations fairly early using one simple clue. Whoever has the less endurance for silence loses. How do you negotiate when one party is holding hostages? What are your top 3 negotiating tips for daily life? What do you do in extreme situations when the other party is just unwilling to negotiate?
Well, I mean, there are cases here where my view is you can make a deal with almost anyone. That's a fundamental premise.
Which is why he got the nickname Undersecretary for Thugs.
Right. and I believe the most important element there is you have to relate to that person personally, and you have to do it real quick. But to do that, you got to do a little research. You just can't go in and tell a joke. I want to know who the last person that talked to this dictator. I want to, if I still have access to intelligence files, what makes this person tick? Where is he vulnerable? Why is he meeting with me? There must be a reason if he's taken the meeting. Then, what I think is essential is you have to break through the glass and let the other side know with candor what is the other side getting out of the negotiation. You know, in some cases, it's very little. There's one case that I use another joke, but also somebody that was refusing to let this American journalist out. His name was Salopek in the Chicago Tribune. Bashir, what's his name, Kevin?
You got it right.
In Sudan.
Yeah.
Well, what's his name?
Bashir, you just said it.
Bashir.
Bashir. Yeah.
Convicted ICC war criminal.
Bashir.
You know, in all the lists, the worst dictator in the world, it's always Bashir of Sudan. Well, he likes me. Anyway, I'd gotten 3 Red Cross workers 12 years before from Sudan, not Americans. And I thanked Bashir 13 years ago for turning them over. He didn't have to do it. This is another negotiation that's in the book. But with Salopek, you know, it was a case where nobody could get him out. Even Barack Obama, as a senator, had traveled there, and he couldn't get him out. He couldn't even meet with Bashir. U.S. government couldn't do it. So it was intractable. And this guy was mad. Bashir was mad at the journalist because the journalist had written that Bashir was terrible and the Darfur case. And so he had imprisoned Bashir, he had imprisoned Salopek and these 2 black Chadians that carried the equipment for the journalist. They were in jail in southern Sudan. So I went to Bashir. The family came to see me, and I don't get involved in prisoner issues unless the family asks me. Then after a letter, then we get involved. We try to be helpful. We don't charge anything. We do the diplomacy. And so I went to see this man, Bashir, and we were desperate. We didn't know what it was going to take. Salopek was sick. So I took his wife, Salopek's wife, and I said to his wife, we're going to meet with Bashir, and I want you to do one thing in the meeting. I want you to cry and show some emotion. And you know, you want to get your husband out. I said, you do want to get him out, right? So we had the meeting. And I kept pleading with Bashir. And this woman, bright, smart woman, she wouldn't cry. And I'd look at her,
Like,
she finally
you start
did.
peeling onions.
Very effectively. She did. And so I say to Bashir, come on. Are you going to give me Salopek or not? He said, okay, you got him. But the 2 Chadians, they're enemies of the state. I'm not going to let them go. I said, Bashir, I can't leave with just one person. I got to get them all. And you know, we went back and forth. I said, I'm going to try this one. I said, okay, Bashir, you're a politician. I'm a politician. how's it going to look? And he nods. You know, his last election, he got 98%, you know, like
Yeah.
some election, right? I said, Bashir, how can I go back to the United States? And you know, I have political ambitions. And he almost said, well, I'm ready to endorse you. I said, no. He actually said something to the AP reporter that was with us, which wasn't helpful. Anyway, I said to him, come on, Bashir, how can I leave with a white guy going with me and the two black guys staying behind? You know, it was like I've gotten grief for saying this, but I did say it. And he looked at me, and like Castro, he burst out laughing. He laughed and laughed and laughed, and he called his staff in and he told them the joke. And he said, okay, go.
At which point you headed right to the airport
Well, actually, he
with
said,
the
"Gotta go
crying
get 'em."
wife.
Yeah.
And you got them all.
We got them all.
That's great. We had a question here. Somebody had a question that stood up.
There's a microphone.
Use the mic, yeah.
When do you stop negotiation? Meaning, is there any point you reach where you say, I can't do anymore?
You got to keep going. You got to be patient. I believe in a negotiation where the next concession you want is for them to meet again. Keep going after it. With North Korea, when I got a couple of American pilots that had been down, this was one of my first, I told the North Koreans, I am not leaving North Korea until I get the pilots. One of them was dead, that had been down, and helicopter pilots off the DMZ. You just keep going. You're respectful, but you don't take no. But then you avoid mistakes like I made in Cuba of getting too
Have you
far.
ever been actually, you're obviously a pretty fearless guy. Have you ever actually been scared for your life?
Yeah, I was scared with Saddam Hussein. I was scared on that first North Korea trip. One time when in the Sudan, in the bush, there was rebel groups. They held 3 Americans. They had all these kids with AK-47s, these little African kids, 11 years old. And we had no security. Yeah, sure you do.
Next question.
Governor Richardson, what is your advice for Americans and other citizens of the Western world who want to go and travel to the DPRK and see it as you have?
Well, first, the first thing you do is let the American embassy know. Secondly,
Don't be a Christian missionary.
yeah, don't
Trying
you know,
to
be very clear. Don't take any technology with you because that gives them don't take your Google stuff.
Yeah.
Because that gives them an excuse. Third, go commercially, go openly, like Eric and I did. We went through Beijing. That's the only place you can fly to. Be careful, it's a Russian plane, you know, it's a little...
Actually, Air Koryo is the airline that we took. It's the North Korean Airlines, and it's never crashed.
But it's
and by that I mean
illusion.
it's officially never crashed. It's actually the second most dangerous airline. They just don't report.
And it has, so we're clear, Air Koryo has the lowest customer satisfaction in the entire
Yeah.
world.
And beyond that, yeah, right. And on the technology issue, one quick anecdote: we had given up our technology. You know, we knew it was in safe hands in the Beijing office of Google, because after all, China is the safest place to leave someplace. But we leave some material. But we arrived there, and we had given away most of our technology, our phones, everything. So when we got to the Foreign Ministry guest house, I think we had arranged, all right, we're going to meet at 7:30 in the lobby the next morning. And as we're walking to our rooms, a couple of us said, wait a minute, I don't have my phone. I can't tell the time. So how are we going to know when to get up? And we'd been told that every room
It's
was
called a
bugged.
wake-up call.
Well, there
in a
wasn't, but
hotel.
I don't know that was an option with the first night because we hadn't arranged it. We didn't know how to do it. So we actually just said, well, we know they're bugged. The rooms are bugged. So just go in and say, I'd like to wake up at 7:30, please.
So Jared announced that he was concerned about cameras in his room, so he would shower in his bathing suit. And I actually slept, and this is true, with the door open because I figured they knew everything.
Why not?
Anyway.
The vent in the shower was made by Panasonic.
Okay, next question.
Suspicious.
Governor Richardson, you've used the word "this guy's a bad guy," "he's a bad guy," "he's a bad guy." Is that any way to start a negotiation, particularly when who is good and who is bad is a very fungible concept?
Well, I was referring to President Clinton did actually say that bad guys like me. And what I do in the book, actually it was my publisher, I didn't think of it. He calls him a shark. Shark is a more generous attribute than calling somebody a bad guy. But yeah, you got to be careful. You can't insult people. I mentioned that Cuba instance when I said the Cubans were unreasonable. Try to not get personal except to connect with the other person.
And an interesting thing in the bizarre negotiation in D.C., things became so bad between the people that one of the political leaders had his staff release the emails from the other side onto the blogosphere, right, in order to embarrass them in between meetings. I mean, it was brutal.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Governor Richardson. So, have you ever been in such a situation that when you are trying to make a personal connection with a dictator, you're trying to be humorous and telling a joke, but the other one just didn't get and feel like you're too personal? Have you met this situation and how you would deal with it?
Well, you know, the North Koreans, they don't think like we do. You know, we believe the concept of negotiation is a quid pro quo. You do something, I do something. The North Koreans don't believe in that. They believe that their position is the right one, and the concession they make is they'll give you a few weeks to come to their position. That's their concession. And when you have that mindset against you, remember, this is a cult of personality, you got to be careful sometimes about the humor. You know, with North Korea, I think, Eric, these guys, we try to be as serious as we can. You want to drive home a message. You want to be candid, but at the same time. So I won't say you delete the humor from the North Koreans, but you're selective in how you use it.
They weren't totally humorless. One of the last nights we were there, there was a moment when I think maybe Jared had said to the woman who they call the Condi Rice of North Korea, Kevin actually has been a writer for The Daily Show. Her eyes lit up. She said, "Jon Stewart, next time you come, you have to bring him with you." I thought two thoughts. One, next time I come, is that an invitation? And the second thought is, I don't think Jon Stewart would come to North Korea.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I was just checking a few pages on your chapter on Venezuela and your interactions with Hugo Chavez, including one of the first defining moments of the U.S. and Venezuela relationship, which was his first visit to the White House.
Yeah.
But aside from your experience with the bad guy, can you elaborate more on mistakes done by other U.S. officials along those 14 years of really bad relationship?
Well, my view with Hugo Chavez is encapsulated in the thought that our policy towards him was basically ignore him. This was U.S. policy. It was almost stated. I think that was a mistake. You know, Clinton, Bush, and you're right. I went to his inaugural when he was first made president. He was insulted that I went and not President Clinton or Gore. So that was like his first, I won't say that was decisive, but so I think ignoring somebody doesn't make sense. I think eventually you have to engage. I always feel that Latin America is a part of the world we should pay more attention to. But right now, you know, our relations with Venezuela is not good. Our relations with Nicaragua is not good. With Cuba, it's not good. With Bolivia, it's not good. We barely have ambassadors there. With Ecuador, it's not good. So ignoring is a policy option, but I would prefer engaging in technology interactions and academic interactions, and you know, once in a while have the Secretary of State visit, even if there are differences. I think that only inflames the country more. With Venezuela, I was at the election of the new president, Maduro. I don't know if he really won. I was so close. But he reached out to me knowing that I was an American and I was an observer of the Organization of Americans. And he sent a message, well, you know, I'd like to improve the relationship with the U.S. And this guy is Maduro. He's not like Chavez was. Chavez was very strong. His people believed in him. And the problem with Maduro, right a few days after, he says to the world, I'll take Snowden. He's in Russia. I'll let him come in. By the way, this may not be popular. I'm not a big fan of Snowden, what he did. I mean, that's the national security of the United States. For him to decide he's going to release what's right and what's wrong, I think that's wrong. But did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir.
Governor Richardson, I'd like to hear from you what kind of negotiation you believe that will help to convince the Chinese leaders, those new leaders, to open up the so-called Great Firewall, given literally like a quarter of internet is running there.
And you remember from our discussions that the Chinese have a censorship portal,
Yeah.
which is known colloquially as the Great Firewall, that sits between Google and the Chinese citizens.
Yeah, but Eric, you guys fixed that problem, didn't you, or not? Did we
working
not?
on it.
I know you're pushing it, but wasn't there some progress on that or not?
I wouldn't know.
No?
I think it's a negotiation, and we're losing.
Perhaps they need a mediator.
Look, we should not fear China. American politics, every campaign, the Chinese, blah, blah, blah. First, we should think of China as a strategic competitor. We should also think of China as a country that is trying to decide where it wants to go. When I was at the UN, they were already a major power. They only paid 3% of the budget. We paid 28% of the UN. And they'd say, we're a developing country. We can't afford more than 3%. Now, they're paying more now, but they still, I don't think, have decided in terms of their great economic power what they're going to do with it. That's my theory. I may be wrong. My point is that the American-Chinese relationship has a lot of different handles. There's the North Korea side, the national security side, military presence in East Asia, the technology side, the trade side. They controlled, they spoke out on the shutdown. They were a little worried about their investments in the U.S. So we have to be very careful in this relationship and know that it has a lot of branches. And when you start insulting each other, the Chinese are very big on saving face, on decorum, on proper channels. I wouldn't use too much humor with them if I were negotiating with them. But I think on the technology side, one of the things that the Chinese will say at the end of a conference, I know Eric goes to a lot of them like I do, as does Kevin, is the Chinese will blast us at the conference, Davos, anywhere. But then at the end of the conference, this is what they say. They say, okay, America, clean up your act, but lead. What I'm trying to say is that I think we just continue these discussions. I think the negotiations on cybersecurity between the two countries are enormously important. And it's better to try to make agreements with them while their policies are evolving. And I think they're trying to decide where they want to go. Eric, what's your thought on that?
I actually agree with you. Let's have these be the two final questions, and then we'll have a wrap-up question, and then we'll be done. Yes, sir.
Hello, Governor Richardson. I wanted to go back to what you mentioned with regards to Cuba and American policy, and you said you were against the current policy. I used to have a young colleague, an American of Cuban descent, who used to say that his father was against changing these policies, his grandfather was against changing these policies, and that Americans of Cuban descent had these opinions and that they represented a strong voting bloc, and that was one of the reasons why things weren't changing and wouldn't change until these people had passed on. How do you feel about that assessment? Is that accurate?
That assessment is accurate because, in a presidential race, Florida and New Jersey are key. Florida, the Cuban-American vote is very strong. The same in New Jersey, where Senator Menendez is from. Where's Menendez? What town in New Jersey?
I don't recall.
One of you guys, come on. One of you guys are from New Jersey, aren't you? Where, Eric? What's that town?
We are Google. We could look this up.
Yeah. By the way, Eric had said, you guys did a Google map on North Korea, and I got a message. Eric wanted to do it before we left.
Yeah.
I said, Eric, let's wait till after we get back.
Yeah.
And it was a great map. But my point is that the Cuban-American vote is changing. The younger generation is saying, you know, we've had this hostile policy towards Cuba, the embargo. Castro's still in power. You know, the country's not doing well. What are we getting out of the embargo? So there's questioning going on. And I think Obama's moved in the right direction on side issues like more family visits, loosening the opportunity of travel of Americans going to Cuba. It's easier to get in right now. But this Alan Gross case, which I mentioned, is a big barrier, and the Cuban five Cubans in American jails that have been in jail for spying are the barriers, human barriers between the two countries. But that vote is changing a bit. Obama won Florida. And, you know, just about the only thing I'll say about the Hispanic vote on this shutdown and the immigration reform, the Republican Party only got 29% of the Hispanic vote, the lowest they've ever had. And if they don't change that policy on immigration, they're going to become a minority party. And right now, the Tea Party Republicans in the House are adamantly opposed to any changes in the immigration law, and that's going to hurt them with Cuban Americans, with Mexican Americans, Central Americans that are part of this American political fabric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our final question.
Government Richardson, I would just like to ask you on a comment on the situation in Syria and how the ongoing negotiations don't seem to bring much, and the whole situation with attack and not attacking. What's your view on this?
Well, you know, I love, besides my love for Google, I love Facebook. I love to read all the comments on Twitter. On this issue, I came out saying I support Obama in the military strikes. Why? Because I think there has to be a consequence, a cost, when there's a violation of human rights of chemical weapons used. I think it's an international crime. Now, I'm not for intervening with boots in the ground and more than that. So I thought that was the right response. Now, what has happened since? Right now, you know, everybody dumps on the UN, but you know who's enforcing the chemical weapons ban, which I think is going to happen in Syria? The UN. Who won the Nobel Prize? The chemical weapons investigators. They won the Nobel. I think that Pakistani woman should have won it. But apart from that,
Malala.
the little girl, what's her name?
Malala.
Yeah. I mean, geez, this little girl was such a great symbol. So what I think is going to happen in Syria, I think Russia, and I'm being generous here, I think Russia realizes that Assad is a loser. He's going to go down. He's not popular. His own military, I believe, is going to take him down. Now, a lot of people disagree with me. They say, oh, you know, nothing's going to change. Obama made a mistake. I think we were actually lucky that what happened was an opportunity that the Russians presented saying, okay, what if we get rid of all the chemical weapons? Will this deter the military strike? And if that negotiation leads to a negotiation on the future of Assad, on a political transition, I think it's a major accomplishment. But the situation is unstable. There's no question about it. But I think the Russians know that this guy Assad is a loser. So if they're maneuvering to have a political transition after the chemical weapons are banned, and I believe the inspectors will make sure that does happen. You know, everybody's a cynic. Oh, it's not going to happen. I'm an optimist by nature. Do you disagree? No?
Kevin, he's negotiating.
Yeah, right.
Kevin,
exactly right.
Kevin, after the successful book tour, what are you going to do next?
That's a good question. I don't know how to live this down or up or what have you. After traveling the world with the two of you and also feeling like I've traveled the world for the last 3 decades and sitting at his knee and learning all the negotiations he's had with these amazing people, I feel like I've lived there too. I was in those rooms, and hopefully the book as well gives you a sense of that. So quite frankly, I'm a little bit exhausted. I'll be honest with you. Next, I feel like I'm told that political satire to some degree. The fake news world is the growth industry.
They have generated so much new material
so
for you.
Apparently, yeah, I'm going to keep pursuing that and see what happens.
Governor, after this is over, you have a foundation. You've been heavily engaged, I know, in Cuban issues. What do you think your next negotiation is?
Right now, I believe, by the way, I formed a foundation with Robert Redford. I'm passionate about protecting wild horses and mustangs. And there's a move afoot to start slaughtering them because they're proliferating. There's no question about it. I just negotiated an agreement with the Navajo Nation, which had announced a policy of killing these horses because they were overrunning the Navajo reservation. So in exchange for them not doing this, the Navajos, we're providing what is called PCP, birth control sanctuaries for the horses. So I have this other foundation, the International Foundation. We specialize in trying to get political prisoners out. We specialize in relations with difficult countries like North Korea, training the legislature where Eric Schmidt's daughter helped us train the legislature in Burma on technology. But apart from that, Eric, right now I've been 32 years in the in the public sector and government. I do speeches. I've got a speakers bureau. I serve on boards. I have a relationship with this PR firm called APCO. But I stay involved in the policy. I'm a defender of the president's. I think he's done a good job on TV. And what my last point is, I'm making a little money, okay? and Eric, my taxes are too high. What do we do about it?
Kevin?
There's one, I would be remiss, forgive me. I would not let this opportunity go by on this particular day as I stare across Governor Richardson and see you across the way to not tell this very quick anecdote, that this is the only place I would be able to tell it, nor should I tell, but I will do it. As you may recall, we didn't get to see Kim Jong-un, but on the day we thought we might, we were instead brought to the Palace of the Sun. Palace of the Sun is the mausoleum where Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung are actually laid out in state, embalmed. They get the Madame Tussauds treatment. I didn't know that. So I'll jump to the chase and say after seeing the entire mausoleum, you get brought into the actual moment where Kim Jong-il is laying there, bathed in red light. You're surrounded by military police. We happened to be there on a day when only military police were also allowed to visit. So we kind of got separated. We ended up being with our own, essentially, troops of military police going in. You're supposed to kneel, bow at the side, bow at the feet, walk around the head, and bow at the other side. We didn't bow, but the military did. And as they bowed, I was staring across Kim Jong-il's nose, and Eric Schmidt is on the other side of it, and he kind of looks, he kind of looks to the side, stares at me, and the absurdity of the situation, I got the worst fifth grade giggle fit. I just closed my eyes and just every muscle tensed. I thought, I cannot start laughing now. There are military police, there are 50 military police around here, and I'm pretty sure I would have been escorted away. But I just thought, as I was staring across your nose...
And this is the most sacred site in their whole country.
Absolutely. Oh.
I hope in our hour you got a sense of why we've become such good friends. And as a bit of advice for all of you, if you ever find yourself in a foreign country with 5 or 6 fellow travelers, turn off your devices a little while, get to know them, because they're going to be fascinating. We've had such a good time. Thank you for this. Thank you for coming. And thank you all for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.